What do Adolf Hitler, Queen Elizabeth II, 9/11, and Elon Musk all have in common? All four of them are believed to be the subject of multi-century-old prophecies. No, really. All four are considered to have been part of the predictions of renowned French astrologer Nostradamus, who supposedly saw many major world events coming all the way back in the 16th century. Copies of his book Les Prophéties, first written in 1555, are still being sold today. And while skeptics might say that Nostradamus' predictions are vague enough to apply to almost any event, it's hard to deny how eerily accurate some of them have been. Nostradamus might have foreseen the rise and fall of various world leaders, the reigns of kings, and even the conquests of Napoleon Bonaparte. Then there are predictions of tragedies on a scale that would have been unheard of back in the 1500s, like the birth of the atomic bomb or the September 11th terror attacks on the World Trade Center. These are all of Nostradamus' prophecies that we could find that actually came true, and even some that might end up coming true by the end of 2024. Better keep watching unless you want something real nasty to catch you off guard. Let's start with one of Nostradamus' prophecies that came true only 4 years after he first wrote Les Prophéties, the death of King Henry II of France. Nostradamus had written, "The young lion will overcome the older one. On the field of combat in a single battle, he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. 2 wounds make 1, then he dies a cruel death." And sure enough, in the summer of 1559, the then King of France would face off against a nobleman 6 years younger than him, named Gabriel, Comte de Montgomery. The two were engaged in a friendly jousting match, and during the final pass, Gabriel's lance angled up and struck Henry II, splintering in 2 shards. One was driven through the visor of the king's helmet, piercing his eye, while the other part of the splintered lance was lodged in Henry's temple, driving into his skull. He spent 10 days in agony from his injuries before dying slowly and painfully in his bed as sepsis took over. According to some reports, the 2 jousters' shields bore emblems of lions, with the younger lion Gabriel overcoming the older Henry by piercing his eyes through a golden cage. Pretty on the nose, right? While it was far from the last time Nostradamus would be right about a forthcoming disaster, he'd previously written, "The blood of the just will commit a fault at London. Burnt through lightning of 23's the 6. The ancient lady will topple from her high place. Many of the same sect will be killed." 111 years before 1666, when the Great Fire of London eventually took place. A small fire spreading from a bakery on Pudding Lane, London, erupted into a blaze that engulfed much of the city and lasted 3 whole days. What about the part referencing the blood of the just, though? Peasant fatalities weren't recorded at the time. However, the Great Fire eliminated millions of rats that had been carrying fleas and spreading the Black Death. The plague was certainly a fault in the blood, to say the least, and its spread was largely halted by the fire. So who was the ancient lady? That one's a puzzle, even by Nostradamus' usual standards, but it could well be referring to the city of London itself, which is pretty ancient. It was first established in 47 AD under the name of Londinium by the Romans after their invasion. The next revolution might not be televised, but one of the most famous in history may have been foretold by our favorite French soothsayer. It seemed Nostradamus could hear the people singing the Song of Angry Men a few centuries early, proclaiming in one of his quatrain poems that songs, chants, and demands will come from the enslaved, held captive by the nobility in their prisons. At a later date, brainless idiots will take these as divine utterances. People enslaved by the nobility and demanding change sounds a lot like the French Revolution. By 1789, the people of France had had enough of the brutal rule of the aristocracy and the disparity between the wealthy ruling class and the poorer citizens. There was widespread suffering, particularly for those incarcerated in the Bastille, a medieval fortress in Paris that was repurposed as a state prison. In other words, those sent there were, how would dear old Nostradamus put it? Alright, held captive by the nobility in their prisons. So, in July of 1789, the people revolted against the French monarchy, and armed Parisians took to the streets and even stormed the Bastille itself, toppling a symbol of the monarchy's oppression and the abuse of the people. So, who were these brainless idiots Nostradamus' prophecy mentioned? Well, in order to have their demands met, the people of France would kidnap members of French royalty, including King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, who were left literally brainless when the guillotines beheaded them. And the revolution was hardly the only major event in France's history that Nostradamus proclaimed to have seen coming either. Of the 900 verses written by Nostradamus as interpretations of what he referred to as visions of things to come, one of his poems read, Pau ne loron, more fire than blood, swimming in praise. The great man hurries to the confluence. He will refuse entry to the magpies. Pampon and Durance will confine them. Now, you might be a little bit at a loss as to what all that means, but Pau, ne, and Loron are actually references to 3 different towns in Paris, although that last one is actually called Oloron. But rearranging the letters, these 3 towns are actually an anagram for Napoleon Roy. Bear in mind that Nostradamus' prophecies were originally transcribed in a mix of Old French, provincial dialects, Italian, Greek, and Latin, and he occasionally referenced individuals' names through anagrams, particularly anagrams of older forms of their names. So, given some leeway, Napoleon Roy is eerily similar to the French phrase Roi Napoléon, or King Napoleon. Yes, that's Napoleon as in Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who seized power in France after the Revolution and drove his army across Europe in the hopes of establishing an empire. More fire than blood could very well be a reference to Napoleon being of non-noble lineage and seizing power through a coup. Plus, his refusing entry to magpies probably has nothing to do with the avian migration paths, as among his many conquests, Napoleon also imprisoned 2 popes, Pius VI and VII. Predicting the future of one country is pretty impressive, but predicting events from other places several thousand miles away? Now that's a party trick. And Nostradamus' predictions of the future weren't limited to just being about France. In one quatrain he wrote, "For 7 years, Philip's fortunes will prosper. He will reduce the Arab army, then halfway through things will perplexedly turn against him. A young onion will destroy his fortune." As it turned out, this prophecy was directly linked to the Catholic King of Spain, Philip II, whose rule had begun just a year after Nostradamus' prophecies were first published. His fortunes, as in his literal fortune, certainly prospered, as the French prophet said, as King Philip indeed became a pretty wealthy man during his early years of reign. Under his command, Spain also slaughtered the fleet of the Ottoman Empire at the Battle of Lepanto, which reduced the Arab army, and Philip II even enacted an expulsion of Muslim people from Spain, which seemed to line up with the prediction. However, just as foretold, things took a turn against Philip when in 1587 Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed. She had also been Catholic, and her death marked an end to Philip's alliance with England. When he attempted to have his Spanish Armada invade the country, the English were able to push back and thwart the invasion. Oh, and that young onion Nostradamus referred to, the one who would destroy King Philip II's fortune, that wasn't about a particularly expensive vegetable, but rather the 36-year-old King Henri IV of France, a Protestant who battled with Philip over their differences in religion. Speaking of more important French figures, Louis Pasteur is one of the most important when it comes to the history of science. He's commonly referred to as the father of microbiology, thanks to his discoveries of processes like pasteurization, which removes bacteria from things like milk in order to make them safe for human consumption, and fermentation, caused by the growth of microorganisms, proving that bacteria didn't just spontaneously appear, as was previously thought. Pasteur's early contributions to science changed the world as we know it, paving the way for vaccines, especially those used to treat rabies and anthrax. So why are we deviating from talking about a famed astrologer and seer to the man who made those important fundamental discoveries about bacteria? Well, that's because Nostradamus might have predicted Pasteur's important findings too, writing, "The lost thing is discovered, hidden for many centuries. Pasteur will be celebrated almost as a godlike figure. This is when the moon completes her great cycle, but by other rumors he shall be dishonored." That lost thing being discovered is widely believed to be referencing the microscopic organisms and processes that Pasteur studied. Given that they're so small, they remain invisible to the naked eye, or hidden for many centuries. But Nostradamus' prediction goes even further too. In 1995, it was revealed by science historian Gerald L. Geisen in his book The Private Science of Louis Pasteur that Pasteur had, quote, dishonored a rival by including his findings in his version of the anthrax vaccine in order to make it work. Score another one for Nostradamus. From the nice and accurate prophecies about a pioneering scientist to a foretelling of the tyrannical rise of one of history's most infamous monsters, Adolf Hitler, commander of the Third Reich and a man responsible for some of the most abhorrent, dehumanizing atrocities ever committed. There's a high chance you already know exactly who Hitler was. After all, his life and crimes have been well documented, especially on this channel. But several centuries before he was even born, Nostradamus wrote the following: "From the depths of the west of Europe, a young child will be born of poor people. He who by his tongue will seduce a great troop. His fame will increase toward the realm of the east." Sounds like a familiar fascist, right? Not only was Hitler known to have been born to a poor family in 1889 in Western Europe, just as prophesied, but like many who held and still hold his fascist ideals, Hitler was also able to verbally sway people as a way of accumulating more power, a great troop, typically by manipulating their pre-existing biases. Just something to watch out for. Then, when you take into account how Hitler aligned Nazi Germany with the various Axis powers that opposed the Allies during World War II, his fame certainly did increase toward the realm of the East, thanks to Hitler's alliance with Japan. However, this wasn't Nostradamus' only prediction related to Hitler and the Second World War. In another, he wrote that beasts ferocious with hunger will cross the rivers. The greater part of the battlefield will be against Hister. Into a cage of iron will the Great One be drawn, when the child of Germany observes nothing. While some think that Hister is a mistranslated or outdated spelling of Hitler, it's actually the Latin name for the Danube River. This is the second longest river in Europe, running from the Black Forest in Germany all the way out to the Black Sea. The Danube flows through or shares a border with not only various parts of Germany but also Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, and Ukraine. And what did these places all have in common? Most were occupied by the Nazis during the Second World War. Do you want to know what else is significant about the Danube? Just a few miles away is where one Adolf Hitler was born, in the region that was known as Austria-Hungary at the time, but that was also called the Danube Monarchy. Ever the prophet to keep a close eye on his home turf's future, Nostradamus also had a prediction about France during World War II. Hercules become king of Rome and of Animarch. A man named de Gaulle is a 3-time leader. Italy and the waters of Venice will tremble. He will be renowned above all monarchs. Now hold on a minute. De Gaulle as in Charles de Gaulle? Well, that reference is about as direct as Nostradamus tended to get in his quatrains. Sure enough, Charles de Gaulle was a 3-time leader, being the head of the Free French Forces, which was France's government in exile during the Second World War, based in London. That's 1. Following the war, de Gaulle was then prime minister of the country's provisional post-war government. That's 2. In 1958, he was the very first president of the French Fifth Republic, which made a hat trick for Mr. Charles de Gaulle and another point on the prophetic scoreboard for reigning clairvoyant champ Nostradamus. Having foreknowledge of the future must have been pretty great for old Nostradamus, right? Is it raining outside today? Oh, it is, just like I said it would. But there are certain future events that, if he really did see them coming, must have been too horrific to even comprehend, as might have been the case with this next entry. The heavenly dart with stretch its course, death in the speaking, a great achievement. The proud nation brought low by the stone in the tree. Rumors of a monstrous human bring purge, then expiation. In August 1945, the culmination of the Second World War was marked by the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Hiroshima had been the site of a Japanese military base with roughly 40,000 soldiers stationed there. An estimated 140,000 people were killed by the bomb. Then, 3 days after the first, another nuclear weapon was unleashed on Nagasaki, killing a further 70,000. The destruction caused was unlike anything seen in the world at the time. Any who managed to escape being instantly vaporized by the blast were faced with a slower, painful death by radiation poisoning. While the atomic bomb, the heavenly dart that fell from the sky, was widely considered to be a pivotal scientific creation, the great achievement of the Manhattan Project led to a tragic loss of lives in the proud nation of Japan. Add to it all the mention of a stone in the tree. This is thought by some to be Nostradamus' describing of the actual shape of the mushroom cloud that filled the sky after the atomic bombs were detonated, towering above what little remained of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's a grim, foreboding image that has long since been used to invoke the inherent horror of nuclear weapons, and one that Nostradamus himself might have been haunted by if his visions and writings were to be believed. Many of Nostradamus' nearly 900 quatrains pertain to historically significant disasters, such as one that seemingly foretold one of the most high-profile deaths in American history, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. According to our 15th century Frenchman, the ancient task will be completed from on high. Evil will fall on the great man. A dead innocent will be accused of the deed. The guilty one will remain in the mist. Now you probably already know the story. In November 1963, JFK was shot dead in the backseat of a car while the president was being driven through Dallas, Texas. The sniper shot was thought to have been fired from a high window or a rooftop, so on high would seem to be an accurate assessment for stargazer extraordinaire Nostradamus. But speculation and conspiracy theories have long surrounded the assassination of JFK, even 60 years after the supposed assassin Lee Harvey Oswald was pinned with the killing of the president. Many believe that either Oswald didn't act entirely alone or that the US government itself might have had a hand in killing Kennedy, with Oswald acting as the fall guy. Strangely enough, Nostradamus' prophecies almost lean directly into those speculations, especially his reference to a dead innocent being accused of the deed. Oswald consistently claimed to have been a patsy, an innocent, but was killed by the owner of a Dallas nightclub, Jack Ruby, before he could stand trial. Pretty convenient way to sweep a high-profile assassination under the rug when the accused isn't alive to defend himself. The guilty one will remain in the mist is especially ominous. But hey, it's not like the various secretive branches of the US government would ever make attempts on the lives of public figures, as the FBI and CIA would rather have you believe. Even today, nobody's entirely certain who killed JFK, with skeptics believing that Lee Harvey Oswald was indeed innocent, and with Nostradamus seemingly sharing their skepticism. Oliver Stone should have given him a co-writing credit. Speaking of the tragic deaths that left a collective scar on the history of the United States, one of Nostradamus' writings stated that the sky will burn at 45 degrees. Fire approaches the great new city. By fire, he will destroy their city, a cold and cruel heart. Blood will pour, mercy to none. Stop us if you can tell where this one's going. A great new city? Sounds a lot like New York. So great they named it twice. The sky burning, fire destroying the city, and a cold, cruel heart responsible for spilling the blood? Could Nostradamus really have predicted 9/11? One of the deadliest terror attacks in the world took place on September 11, 2001, when two planes struck the World Trade Center. 2,753 people were killed, with a further 224 lives being lost during a concurrent assault on the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Thousands were injured, and the United States as a whole was changed forever by that fateful day. It doesn't seem like much of a leap to link Nostradamus' reference to the Great New City with New York City. Just ask any proud New Yorker and they'll tell you just how great it is. The lines about the cold and cruel heart and mercy to none seem to line up with the perpetrators of the attack, the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. And as for the sky burning, well, there's a pretty high chance you've seen at least one of the famous images of the Twin Towers ablaze. But 45 degrees is pretty interesting. Some believe that it's not referring to the angle of the smoke or even the towers themselves, but instead alludes to 45 degrees latitude. There's just one problem there. That is nowhere near New York. In the US, it's actually just under 500 miles away in Maine. So there's about as much of a possibility that the original version of this quatrain has been misinterpreted or mistranslated as it is that Nostradamus actually saw the 9/11 attacks coming. Let's jump a bit more forward in time to some of Nostradamus' prophecies that might have come true as recently as 2023. The first few years of the tumultuous decade that is the 2020s have definitely been challenging for the world at large, to say the least. And of course, there were those who had the concern that Nostradamus' writings were foretelling of a total apocalypse that could befall Europe. One of his pieces included a line that some people think was a direct reference to the war in Ukraine. 7 months the Great War, people dead of evil doing. Rouen Ivru shall not fall to the king. The specific worry is that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine will escalate into a wider conflict. Concerns and speculations about a third world war are always rampant, especially even taking a cursory glance at the political landscape of the world over the last few years. It's certainly hard to ignore the number of innocent people who are now dead of evil doing, thanks to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, with many more forced to leave their homes and flee to safety. Although that 7-month timeline might have been a bit cynical on Nostradamus' part. At least at the time of the writing of this video, World War III, thankfully, hasn't broken out yet. From the death of many to the death of one, it turns out Nostradamus might have seen the death of Queen Elizabeth II coming. Or at least that's according to one person's interpretations of his works. Released in 2006, Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies for the Future, was written by one Mario Redding and flew mostly under the radar until it managed to sell a considerable number of copies in 2022, with 5 selling just before the death of the British monarch and nearly 8,000 copies of the book flying off the shelves in the subsequent weeks after she died. According to Redding, others who had studied Nostradamus' quatrains had overlooked an important one, given that it was indexed under the numbers 1022. Redding believed that this correlated to the date of the Queen's death, meaning it would take place during the 10th month of 2022. He wasn't far off, to be fair, since Queen Liz did eventually pass in September 2022, the 9th month of the year. The quatrain itself read, "Because they disapproved of his divorce, a man who later they considered unworthy, the people will force out the King of the Isles. A man will replace who will have no mark of a king." And if you know anything about the British royal family, then you might have some inclination as to which of its members Nostradamus could have been referring to. Redding believed that this prediction, as well as the foretelling of the Queen's death, was Nostradamus' way of saying that Prince Charles would likely abdicate from the throne, owing to the widespread dislike for him among the British public. A lot of Brits still resent Charles for his divorce from the widely beloved Princess Diana, and harbor some pretty choice feelings toward Charles' second wife, Camilla Parker Bowles, who he'd been having an affair with before his divorce from Diana. Charles III hasn't abdicated yet, but hey, there's still time. Place your bets on when down in the comments, folks. Sadly for Mario Redding, he died in 2017 and didn't get to see whether his interpretation of Nostradamus' writings were accurate, but that doesn't rule out a possible royal abdication sometime down the line, like Nostradamus supposedly foretold. In something of a late-breaking update to this particular prophecy, from as recent as early 2024, Charles III was diagnosed with cancer. If his health deteriorates badly enough, he could well be forced to abdicate, and given his penchant for alternative medicine, it's entirely possible that something like that might still happen. Speaking of weird rich guys, billionaire and social media power user Elon Musk is also believed to be the subject of one of these prophecies. Another of Nostradamus' quatrains reads as follows: "The two contenders will unite together when most others unite with Mars. The African leader is fearful and trembles. The dual alliance is separated by the fleet." Well, while our old pal Mario Redding believed pretty optimistically that this could be a foretelling of two large global superpowers joining forces to put a stop to warfare, his son Laurie has a different reading. He's convinced the African leader Nostradamus references is none other than Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa. While he's not spending too much time on Twitter, one of Musk's biggest talking points has long been colonizing Mars, which would link Nostradamus' reference to the Red Planet. There are a number of other Nostradamus prophecies that relate to events from very recent history, like one that states, "So high will the bushel of wheat rise, that man will be eating his fellow man." When taken as a metaphor, it's hard not to relate this to the financial disparity between the super wealthy and the rest of us. Inflation, the world over, has reached mind-boggling levels in the last few years, and it seems like Nostradamus could have been, if you'll pardon the pun, right on the money with that one. Hey, remember not long ago, in October 2023, when Republican members of the House of Representatives were squabbling over who they wanted to elect as Speaker of the House? Infighting among the party, spearheaded by far-right members, led to the then Speaker Kevin McCarthy being ousted after a small group of Republicans caused Congress to fall into disorder. A total shutdown of the government almost happened as a result, and the whole embarrassing situation resulted in the House ousting its Speaker for the first time in U.S. history. Well, turns out Nostradamus might have had that one earmarked as coming up too. Although finding the specific prophecy relating to it is tricky, there are references and allusions to the leading power in the world facing a complicated and turbulent time. Then again, when isn't that happening? Some have thought that this could be related to the farce that took place in the House of Representatives last year. Others have interpreted it as being about the death of Pope Emeritus Benedict XIV, with its impact on the Vatican. The thing about a lot of Nostradamus' writings is that there are plenty that are pretty ambiguous and very open to a wide range of interpretations. With that being said, though, quite a number of Nostradamus' predictions have been frighteningly accurate over the course of history. But what's arguably even more terrifying is some of the ones that are still yet to come true. What does the future hold according to the 15th century Frenchman? Well, one of his writings potentially holds links to the ongoing climate crisis. For 40 years, the rainbow will not be seen. For 40 years, it will be seen every day. The dry earth will grow more parched, and there will be great floods when it is seen. While we're sure that people have definitely seen rainbows in the last 40 years, it's hard to ignore the severe changes in weather patterns occurring the world over as a result of climate change. Storms, wildfires, and climbing temperatures are much more commonplace now, with the average global temperature set to rise more than 34 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of 2024. January of this year was one of the warmest on record, with many leading climate scientists warning that we're all at a crucial point where, unless more is done now, the consequences for the entire planet could be dire further down the line. That's far from all that could be in store in 2024, according to old Nostradamus. I hope you like geopolitical conflicts, everyone, because there could well be more on the way soon. Many experts in geopolitics are concerned about the tension between the US and China, and as the latter has grown in power, some worry it might lead to a clash between the two. Among those concerned is, well, you guessed it, a certain French astronomer. Centuries back, Nostradamus predicted that a red adversary will become pale with fear, putting the great ocean in dread. Some have taken the red adversary to mean the Chinese Communist Party, who hasn't shied away from displaying their naval capabilities in the past, particularly around the South China Sea. That's not the only potential shakeup that Nostradamus warned was on the horizon for 2024 either. Let's jump back into that quatrain about his contested British king. The people will force out the King of the Isles. A man will replace who never expected to be king. Mario Redding wrote in his book about Nostradamus' prophecies that he interpreted this to be a reference to Charles, after abdicating, being replaced by not the popular choice of his eldest son and current heir, Prince William, but instead Prince Harry. The idea of Charles's replacement being someone who has no mark of the king could easily point toward Harry, especially since his estrangement from the royal family along with his wife Meghan Markle. Then again, maybe being replaced by someone with no mark of a king means that the monarchy will be abolished, especially since that same prophecy tells of the king being driven out by the force of the people. Another of Nostradamus' upcoming predictions pertains to another world figure being replaced. The Vatican's next top pope might be stepping into the holy shoes soon. According to another of Nostradamus' writings, through the death of the very old pontiff, a Roman of good age will be elected. That's right, this isn't going to be just any old pope. It's going to be a new and improved young pope. Somebody call Jude Law. Pope Francis, the current pope, has long faced health problems, most owing to the fact that he's in his mid-80s. None of us are as spry as we used to be by that age. No amount of Holy Spirit can change it. So the idea of this very old pontiff being replaced by a more vigorous Roman of good age in the role of the pope seems plausible when you take Nostradamus' word for it. But then again, he also wrote that while this young pope might wear the big white hat for a while, Nostradamus also prophesied he would weaken his see, whatever that means. The exact meaning is open to debate. It could mean that the influence of the Vatican or the Catholic Church in general will lessen with a younger pope at the helm, or that they could be involved in some wider scandal during his tenure. Nostradamus might well have been clairvoyant, but then again, we're talking about a man who once claimed to have invented a pill to protect from the effects of the plague. He was expelled from medical school because he was found to be practicing as an apothecary for a side hustle, and yet he still found work as a fully qualified doctor. He even used to get high on nutmeg to induce hallucinations, which could very well have formed a large part of the visions he alludes to in his purposefully vague, cryptic, and metaphorical writings. Most of his quatrains could even be applied to multiple historical events from before and after he wrote them. Take the "fire approaches the great new city." That could easily be recounting the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and the destruction of Pompeii, as much as it could be foretelling 9/11. The thing about prophecies isn't really to predict or tell the future before it happens. Instead, it's almost the exact opposite. Prophecies and predictions like Nostradamus's might feel like they were portents of things to come, but really, they only take on that context after an event, usually as a way to reassure us that somebody saw it coming. Then again, maybe anyone can see the future. Let's give it a try. We predict you'll leave a like on this video and check out more episodes of the Infographic Show, like ancient prophecies that actually came true. Or we predict that you'll watch this video instead.